Indigo Park has been a rising phenomenon among the mascot horror community. Although it's a pretty short experience, lasting about 1 to 2 hours on a casual playthrough, it manages to create a mix of fun gameplay gimmicks and comedic scenarios whilst having an eerie intense atmosphere at the same time. And if that wasn't enough, the game was completely free to play, amassing thousands upon thousands of downloads and achieving a Steam rating of overwhelmingly positive within a few weeks. This really seemed like a game that could appeal to everyone, right? Well, except for speedrunners. But let me tell you why. Unique Geese, the lead developer of the game, aimed for a flawless experience and wanted the game to have absolutely zero bugs when released to the public, and he was not joking around. If you were to look at the wall of playtesters in the credits after completing Indigo Park, you'd realize that most of them were popular YouTubers and streamers whose main content was based around doing insanely hard challenges, and you guessed it, breaking any game they came across. Needless to say, the game was insanely optimized, which was good for most, but terrible for anyone looking to beat it as quickly as possible. However, all of this bug fixing did not stop the speedrun community from trying everything they possibly could as a way to break boundaries and save as much time as possible, whether it was done by ramming into a wall countless times until something happened, quite literally actually, or by randomly coming across interesting errors in the code that had snuck past playtesting. Speedrunners were going to give it a shot, and the results they got from it were beyond insane. So without further ado, this was the quest to break Indigo Park. But wait, before any of that, let me quickly introduce you to how the game came to be in the first place, as it will help you understand why it was so difficult to find any glitches. Indigo Park is an indie project created by Unique Geese, or Mason, a well-known YouTube content creator. His career started in 2019 with variety streaming related content spanning across different games, but it was only in 2021 that he started gaining some attention with his Friday Night Funkin' content. He stuck to it for quite some time, while also throwing in some Five Nights at Freddy's videos later on, which introduced him to the mascot horror scene. You know, games like FNAF, Poppy Playtime, Bendy, and Garden of Banban. Speaking of Banban, Unique Geese made some content regarding the first 2 chapters, playing through them, uncovering secrets, and straight up remaking the game with no developing experience in a single week and coming up with an even better experience than the original. What? This was Banban Reincarnated, Mason's debut in game developing, and he did an amazing job with it. He managed to remove the janky gameplay and silly character designs in Banban Chapter 1 and turn it into a liminal, claustrophobic experience with a horrifying cast. I mean, just look at Opilogord's evolution for God's sake. Might also be important to mention that he got popular YouTubers slash speedrunners Astral Spiff and David Barron to playtest the game, which may or may not be foreshadowing what's about to come. You know. Both the game and the video Mason made on it gained a huge amount of views, and people were excited to know if he was planning on making another game like this in the future. And to their surprise, just 4 months after Reincarnated's release, a game trailer was uploaded onto the Unique Geese channel. The name of it? Indigo Park. This was the official trailer for the first chapter of this brand new mascot horror franchise, and from the very start, the game had a lot of potential. An adorable little protagonist? Check. Catchy tunes? Yup. And a terrifying scenery to balance out the scare factor? You got it. The description of the video trailer stated the following. Indigo Park is an immersive first-person exploration game that takes you on a thrilling journey through the eerie remnants of an abandoned amusement park. Once one of the most renowned theme parks in the world, Indigo Park was suddenly shut down after a mysterious, horrific incident. Find items, solve puzzles, and restore the power to the park, as you run from the reason it shut down. Now if that doesn't scream peak mascot horror to you, I don't know what does. Throughout the rest of 2023 and start of 2024, Mason would upload more trailers, game dev Q&As, and general updates on its current state. And when I first saw these, I was amazed. Also, it was later announced that the first chapter would be completely free? It was more than clear that this was going to do numbers upon release. And sure enough, on May 18th, 2024, the first chapter was uploaded onto Steam. And let me tell you, it did not disappoint. After more than a year of development, Indigo Park was finally out to the public, and needless to say, it did amazingly well for a first-time indie project. The game topped the charts on Steam's upcoming releases tab, and at the time of recording has over 10,000 positive reviews. With all this in mind, let's quickly go over what this chapter's gameplay is about before we talk about how players demolished it, shall we? For this part of the video, I'll be dividing the game into 5 stages, as each one has their own quirks and gimmicks. So let's go ahead and start up a new save file. The game starts off with a short film that seems to date back decades ago, where a man, later known as Isaac Indigo, talks about Indigo Park, a place of creativity, joy, and fantasy where all of your dreams come true. The camera then pans out to a room where a monitor displays 2 people, which seem to be talking about revisiting an abandoned amusement park. The main character is then seen driving towards said location, which, surprise surprise, is none other than Indigo Park. And thus, stage 1 begins. The player starts off close to the park's entrance, but the main door appears to be locked. After trying to find a way inside, they find themselves in a small room, and all of a sudden...
Hi there, and welcome to Indigo Park!
This is Rambly the raccoon, and chances are you've probably seen him on every corner of the internet at this point. Though, can you really blame him? He's adorable. Rambly introduces himself and encourages you to explore the park, helping you open the main gate by turning on the generator. Once you're inside the park, he makes you enter the gift shop, where he introduces you to the key item that will help you most throughout the game. For example, Security Breach has the Faz Watch, Poppy has a grab bag hands, and in this one, you have the privilege to obtain a handcuff. Yeah. Anyways, after walking around some more, you then come across the first save point of the game and make your way to stage 2, the tunnel. Oh. Well, that's a problem. After the entrance seemingly closes in on itself, Rambly guides you into a train ride where you meet the main cast of the park. Firstly, there's Molly Macaw, an avian pilot who's the main focus of Chapter 1. Then there's Finley the Sea Serpent, the less relevant character as of now, but one of my personal favorites regardless. There's also Lloyd for the Lion, the classy actor and also the character Rambly hates the most. And finally, there's Molly Macaw. Wait a minute, once the train ride is over, you're then able to freely explore the remains of the park, which I'll call the game's 3rd stage. You attempt to enter Molly's Jetstream Junction, but must venture across Lloyd's main theater to get the access key for it. After a couple minutes of maze solving, you make it back to Molly's warehouse, also known as Stage 4. When you first enter this area, Rambly encourages you to visit the main attraction, Rooftop Races, though it's pretty much inoperable due to the decaying state of the park, so Rambly settles for the next best thing, the landing pad. Once you're there, you'll find 5 giant cubes, with each one having different colors and 4 symbols. To beat this puzzle, you must dive into the landing pad's tubes as to find 5 shapes in their respective color, and then assigning those to the corresponding cubes. Also, Molly's there with you every step of the way, so don't get too cocky while exploring. Or do. Every jumpscare is still scripted up until now anyways. After you're done cracking the code, freedom awaits! All you have to do is walk through that conveniently placed steel door and it'll all be over. Yeah, Molly's had enough and now she's hunting you down. Welcome to the final stage of the game, the chase. This section is actually pretty simple. Dodge some obstacles, hop on trampolines, go through a vent section, and you'll find a security office where Rambly's waiting for you. Oh yeah, Molly, watch out for that sliding door. Ooh, never mind. After all of this, Rambly finally confesses that he's aware of everything that's happened to the park, and he apologizes for dragging you down this rabbit hole. But he also promises that he can make amends for his mistakes and restore the park if you choose to help out. And be honest, are you really gonna say no to this fella? So you both make your way into Oceanic Odyssey, Finley's attraction and what will probably be the main focus for Chapter 2. You take a look at the Serpent Guy and the game ends. The final credits roll along with a musical banger from Rambly himself. A great ending to a great game. It was so great actually that the $75,000 fundraiser for Chapter 2 was funded within 24 hours. Now that's something you don't see every day. And that pretty much explains all of Indigo Park gameplay wise. Now it's time to finally get into the main premise of the video. I'll be explaining the initial breakthroughs from my personal POV since I was among the first few people to speedrun Indigo Park just a few hours after release. With all of that said, let's take a look at how the game was destroyed over time. Upon the first day of Indigo Park's release, I decided to give it a shot. I played through the game quote-unquote normally, saying this because I was actively trying to find skips and speedrun tricks, but despite my best attempts I couldn't get anything to work, and it was only when I saw the playtesting credits that I noticed why. Some of the people listed had tons of experience with breaking games and speedrunning them using skips, which kinda let me down since I thought that the game wouldn't have an active speedrun scene because of that, although I couldn't be any more wrong. After a few hours, Hawks, who I've previously mentioned on my video about security breach speedruns, invited me to the newly founded Indigo Park speedrunning Discord server, where I learned that I wasn't the only one having major issues with trying to find any relevant skips. Luckily though, very minute time saves were discovered as more people experienced their first playthroughs, so let me quickly list all the small skips found within the first few minutes. Firstly, you could buffer the interact key to skip cutscenes and grab items as quickly as possible. If you don't know, buffering occurs when you can perform a certain action before the game allows it to be executed, which makes it happen on the first possible frame. You can also do this with the W key as to start moving right after the initial cutscene. Though, for some odd reason, doing this with the gear that allows the first generator of the game to be turned on would crash the game? So it was best to wait a second on that one. Another one of these time saves was binding the jump button to the scroll wheel, as it would allow you to jump multiple times a second. This may seem a little useless, but since the collision was pretty janky, you can make your way up certain objects and skip small portions of the path you're intended to go. For example, you can climb up metal gates in the start to get to the main door faster, but also jump over a speaker on the backstage area to save having to go all the way around. It was also discovered that the code for the landing pad area was always the same, regardless of the save you were playing on. People also wondered if the pink cube's code, which would initially allow you to enter the tubes and find every symbol, was really needed in the run. Turns out that it was also useless, saving a few seconds. Pretty big seeing how the initial speedruns were clocking in at just 16 minutes long, even without using any big skips. Lastly, a user by the name of Vacwix found that once in the gift shop after entering the park, you'd be able to pick up the cuff through the ceiling instead of having to wait a few seconds for it to descend in the little elevator. Pretty silly and easy to execute in runs. A short while after these were initially discovered, two slightly bigger time saves were found by players Danger1451 and Wheat, and seeing how most people thought the game couldn't be broken in any way, these two skips were their saving grace. The first ever big skip actually ended up getting banned from runs for a multitude of reasons I'll discuss in just a moment. It first happened when Danger, a popular speedrunner who has honed records on a lot of mascothorror games, like Puppy Chapter 3, noticed that one of his best runs at the time was falling 20 seconds behind the 80% world record, owned by Barney Goose with a 15:26. They also noticed that they had entered the train ride at the exact same second as Barney, but for some reason the ride had slowed them down by almost half a minute. Now, how was this possible? Danger, Barney, and the entire speedrun community were confused at the time, until people asked what FPS each of them was running the game on. Barney's game was supposedly running on triple-digit FPS, all the while Danger was actually playing with VSync, which syncs your frames per second to the refresh rate of your monitor, that probably being 60. Now, the only conclusion to this problem that made actual sense was that the train ride was determined by FPS. The higher frames you got, the faster the train would go, shaving almost a full minute if compared to doing it on 60. This was extremely controversial among the community, meaning that the entire speedrun would become hardware dependent if the skip was approved. Luckily though, it did not, meaning that FPS are currently locked to 60 throughout the duration of the run. Thankfully though, the second strat would actually be allowed in runs. While trying to find Jetstream Junction's access key in the backstage area, you must navigate through a long maze of boxes, then get the keys and go all the way back to the theater's entrance. Turns out that due to faulty collision in the maze, you could climb up boxes in certain spots and find yourself atop of the entire area. Though you can't just go wherever you want, because light isn't the only threat that inhabits the theater. That's right, invisible walls. This place was riddled with them everywhere, so it was hard to find a route that could save time in the run. Luckily, another speedrunner named Wheat proposed two possible routes that could maybe shave off some time. The first one didn't seem very doable, but the second one would cut about 3 seconds if well executed. All you had to do was spam jump all in the middle of two boxes, then do some simple parkour while avoiding invisible walls and falling down in a tiny hole near the entrance. Fairly simple and easy to perform. With all of these tricks in mind, the record would drop down to a 15-minute 38-second run by Barney Goose, who dominated the leaderboard during the first few days of the game being out. I know I've mentioned the 1526 earlier, but all the runs were now capped to 60 FPS. Still though, seeing as how the run was less than 15 seconds behind, it was pretty nice. Though little did everyone know that one of the most broken skips in the entire game would be found just a couple of minutes later. It was late on the night of May 18th when a player began an Indigo Park speedrun after resetting a multitude of times. They went through the game relatively fast and got most of the initial segments done. After heading towards the tunnel, however, an unexpected bug would occur. The screen faded to black, but instead of placing them inside of the tunnel, the game instead put them right as the train ride started, skipping almost a full minute of gameplay. The runner immediately reached out to the Discord and showed a clip of what happened, though everyone was really skeptical. At first, people thought this was a splice, which happens when a speedrun cheater secretly cuts off a portion of their run and replaces it with a better attempt on the final video to get the best possible time. The skip, however, turned out to be fully legit, and got nicknamed Splice Skip for how ridiculous it seemed when watched on a live run. And even though an explanation for it will later be found, it still took a whole day until players finally cracked the setup for it. It's also important to mention that said player managed to finish the run where they had gotten the skip in, getting a final time of 15 minutes and 4 seconds, a new 20% world record by a huge margin. But what you're probably thinking right now is why I'm being so mysterious when talking about their identity. And that's because the player who initially came across this massive skip was actually me. Yep, on that day I was just randomly doing runs when I skipped a massive portion of the game by complete accident, and I was in pure disbelief. Though, I must admit, I didn't really find this skip. In fact, there's still people who claim to have found it for the very first time today, and I don't blame them since it's very much confusing at first. The setup for it can easily be performed accidentally, leading many to assume that this is a first time discovery. I guess that the splice skip was found by everyone, but also nobody at the same time, making it pretty unique. Oh yeah, I talked about the setup for it, right? Well, the day after I had performed the splice for the first time, I eventually found a way to replicate it. So here's what I assume happens when executing it. So, it turns out that the game can misplace your position when you pause and quit as the train ride starts and the screen fades to black. If you then start a brand new save file, go through the game as usual, and get back to the tunnel, the game will act as if the checkpoint that occurs when the tunnel entrance collapses never existed in the first place, putting you on the next checkpoint instead. Though this actually meant that a new category would have to be created for the skip, as it required you to play on 2 different save files. In speedrunning, skips like these are usually put in an NG Plus category, formerly known as New Game Plus, where a player creates a setup on a previous save file that will benefit him on the run they're attempting later. I actually mentioned NG Plus on my previous video talking about how players managed to beat security breach in a minute and a half, and it's all thanks to a skip of this kind, where you mess with an out of bounds mechanic and faulty save files as to get teleported to the very last room of the game. After a new category was made for NG+, I managed to pull off a 1459, which stood as the world record for a few hours until it got beaten by Loaf with a 1455, and then Barney Goose with a 1443. So congrats to both of them. The record has since been lowered a couple more times, but we'll talk about how players got to such times on the next few chapters. Anyways, I don't want to be rambling on... Why did I highlight this on the script? Anyways, I won't be going on about my personal achievements for much longer, as within the next couple of days, some of the most broken strats in Indigo Park would finally be discovered. The Indigo Park speedrunning community was relatively small during the first few days of its existence, having less than 20 runs on the leaderboard and very few members on the Discord server. But about half a week in, the game had a massive spike in popularity, and a lot more speedrunners decided to give it a shot. although that came with quite a few downsides. As you know, Chapter 1 is mostly a linear experience, and you can't really improve your movement in speedruns besides cutting corners and not messing up with item pickups. The skips that have been found so far did take a bit to learn, but were extremely consistent most of the time, meaning that a lot of runs would clock out just seconds away from each other, overcrowding the leaderboards, which I'll admit isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the game had been out for so little time. Having near perfect records this early on would most likely kill off the speedrun scene immediately, so new players began to attempt everything that could possibly save time and be fairly hard to execute. And let's just say that they were quite successful at doing so. Maybe even a little too successful, but we'll discuss that later. First of all, let's talk about these from chronological order, since they became more and more absurd as time went on. For now though, let me go over the quote-unquote basics. These don't really qualify as skips due to how they function, but they're still fair time saves nonetheless. So, to start off with something simple, though pretty weird I'll admit, it was discovered that the game saves your camera position at all times, even during cutscenes. What does this mean exactly? Well, knowing that your camera angle wouldn't really change if you went through a loading area, like, for example, that one broken room in the train ride where you have to walk over and fix a generator to keep going, the camera could be pointed directly at the door while still inside the train, and what would happen next is that you'd spawn facing directly at it and get the best possible path each time. Another odd entry discovered a few days after release was related to the player's hitbox. See, for whatever reason, the player model had an asymmetric hitbox, where the front was bigger than the back. What this meant was that you could do very specific parts of the game backwards and it would save time instead of performing them the normal way. Don't worry though, as the only place where this skip proved to be useful was right at the start where Rambley opens the door to the generator room. If you walk into it backwards, you'll trigger a dialogue sequence slightly sooner than when doing it while moving forwards, as you would collide with the dialogue trigger slightly faster. Believe me when I say I was scared to death when this was first discovered. I did not want to pull a backwards person every time I wanted to get a record. I'm actually pretty glad this one didn't work out so well. You know, maybe having a fairly easy run with consistent skips isn't so bad after all. It would be a shame if someone were to find a massive skip that's also extremely difficult to pull off, or as I said this. On May 21st, a few players were doing some route testing near the backstage area, trying to find ways to optimize the already existing box skip. Oh yeah, remember when I talked about scripted jump scares in this part of the game? Side note, no you didn't, because you actually cut off this part from the script. So, you know. Oh. Well, after wandering around the box maze for a while, Lloyd sneaks in and attempts to catch you, though failing miserably. While this cutscene is happening, you can't really make any progress for about 5 seconds, since you would only be let through after it was finished. If there was a way to somehow jump past Lloyd's trigger and then manage to get back through the now blocked path, since you didn't trigger the cutscene to open it up, you could save quite a lot of time. While a way to skip the trigger had been found by jumping on 2 boxes near the office, then gaining speed on the pallet and just barely squeezing in through a tiny gap, there was no way to get back after obtaining the keys. But couldn't you do the box skip from earlier, you guys might be asking? Not really, since it was only after said cutscene that Lloyd would place the boxes in their respective positions. So, was this a lost cause? Many people thought so. But a speedrunner by the name of Brawley kept trying to find ways to climb out of that area without triggering Lloyd, and after a few hours of trial and error, she found this. Yup, Lloyd skip had officially been born. By precisely jumping on the box near the old statue, and then making your way back from where you initially came from, you had just gotten the access key for Jetstream Junction whilst completely avoiding Lloyd's cutscene. This was massive when it was first discovered, being the game's second big time save to have been found so far. What separated it from Splice skip though was the fact that this time, it was actually difficult to perform. Like, half of your runs would die there type of difficult. Needless to say, Indigo Park speedruns would become a lot more skill based than they previously were. Now, from what I could gather, Lloyd skip affected both the NE% and NG Plus records, becoming an essential time save if you wanted to get a podium deserving time. By May 22nd, a day after the skip's discovery, Barney Goose lowered this record from 1522 all the way to 1514, and many other speedrunners heavily improved their times across all existing categories thanks to it. Wait, what? How did 100% save over a minute compared to everyone else? And why is there an NG Plus category for it as well? Oh no. Alright, let's get back to New Game Plus and the Splice skip for a second. As you know, if you entered the tunnel after leaving your previous save file on the train cutscene, you'd skip an entire portion of the map. Back when I came across it for the first time, I wondered if this could work for every cutscene in the game, including things like the Lloyd jumpscare at the very end of the theater section, or even the landing pad slide that would take you to the chase area. All of these seem to have potential, but sadly, after testing them a couple of times, I could only replicate the bug during the ride. So, was this the end? Not really, as there was a spot that nobody would have ever thought about trying to skip on, mainly because many were under the assumption that NG Plus was banned in the category it was used in, that being 100%. For those who don't know, 100% has you beating the game as fast as possible while getting all 12 collectibles scattered across the map. The Splice skip was completely useless in 100% due to the fact that there was an item in the tunnel, making the run impossible to finish if that section was jumped over. But wait, there's one specific segment that isn't usually performed when doing an any % run, that being the arcade machine in Jetstream Junction's lobby, where you must complete a short minigame before being granted a virtual Rambleberry and then proceeding as usual. Let's see, if we get to Jetstream Junction, interact with this arcade, beat the minigame, get the berry, make our way to the landing pad's entrance, then quit the game, restart via a new save file and check my collectibles. Surely this extremely unconventional setup won't keep the berry in my inventory and help me skip the arcade section as a whole, right? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Yeah, this skip was a complete mess. The quest to find this bug started on May 23rd by Loaf of Bread 91. While they were attempting a jumbled run of the whole chapter, but after coming across the arcade section, which is currently deemed to be impossible without a few mandatory jumps, they went to ask the Discord for help on skipping the arcade as a whole. And it just so happened that later on the exact same day, someone over on the official Indigo Park Discord had randomly gotten the Rambleberry before even making it to the arcade. Loaf and Prolly then asked the user a few questions and brought the topic back to the speedrunning server, where a user named Cheese claimed to have once found it on accident. With this in mind, Prolly did some more research and eventually found a way to replicate it using the setup I've just mentioned. From what I can tell, and I'm being kinda skeptical on this one, it seems like during your current session, the game's save files wipe out all the collectible data when starting a new game, except for the Rambleberry under very specific conditions, meaning that if you play the arcade and quit the game upon entering the very next loading zone, the berry would stay with you after the creation of a new save file, shaving off more than a minute in all 100% runs. But unfortunately, due to the Rambleberry skip being NG Plus related, a brand new category was made for it as a consequence, and even though it's not nearly as popular as the others, I still highly respect the 2 people that have given it a shot. Well done, guys. For the next few days, things would go radio silent when it came to finding skips, as most runners were overwhelmed by the huge amount of time saves that had been found in such a short period of time, and instead focused on attempting to get better runs using all of them at once. On May 27th, however, a new runner would join the Indigo Park speedrunning Discord and present a new strategy that nobody had ever witnessed. The runner in question, who has since chosen to remain anonymous, joined the server and immediately went into the voice chat where people would stream some of their runs while talking to other members of the community. A few minutes went by, and then, whilst trying to perform Lloyd skip, they did something new. According to the player, they were attempting the first part of the skip where they suddenly clipped into a wall and phased into the office, and everyone went wild over it. If this was real, then it meant that the run could have another 10 seconds cut from it, easily allowing any percent to reach the sub 15 barrier. Although, there was something really fishy about this. The player didn't have any recorded proof of said skip, and the only person in the voice chat with them at the time was a friend. But since Indigo Park was in the middle of a massive breakthrough, people began grinding it out trying to find a way to re-execute it. a lot of factors had to be taken into place, such as the frame rate, screen resolution, lag spikes, and God knows what else. Speedrunners collectively poured in dozens of hours trying to pull it off a second time, changing every single setting available. Probably in particular ended up spending 50 whole hours in an attempt to recreate it, but unfortunately, nobody was ever successful at doing so. So, was this a hoax? Well, there's no real answer to that. Maybe everything they said was completely false and they were only trying to get a reaction out of it, but let's not jump into conclusions. When I first got the Splice skip to work, many people probably thought that I was just messing with them as the skip seemed to be faked. I mean, just look at this. It seems like, a splice. What I'm trying to say is that this could have actually happened at some point, whether it was because of faulty hardware or because a sunbeam specifically hit the runner's PC and changed the XYZ coordinates of the player, nobody knows. Though as of right now, the skip was eventually forgotten about and never attempted in runs. So I suppose that this concludes the story behind the biggest mystery in Indigo Park speedrunning thus far. And also, 7 to Prolly, I still value the commitment though. For the first part of this chapter, it's best if we base ourselves on another game with broken speedrun strats, like, shall we say, Puppy Playtime Chapter 3. For those who aren't familiar with Chapter 3 speedruns, just know that the game usually takes about 3 hours to beat, yet players manage to complete it in 8 minutes. And it's all thanks to the abuse of interactable objects like chairs and barrels. If you attempted to pull these with both your grab bag hands while standing on top of them, you'd be flying a huge vertical distance and could easily make your way to the final boss fight room within the first 4 minutes of the run. Now, why am I talking about Puppy Playtime speedruns in an Indigo Park video, you might be asking? Well, it turns out that the object launch strats also exist around here, and it's way worse than anything you could be possibly thinking of. Trust me. Shortly before the window skip controversy, a runner named Jester1219 posted a few screenshots of them stuck in very weird spots in the theater. When people asked him how they had gotten up there, Jester mentioned chair launches. Players found out that there were a couple of chairs behind the main stage of the theater. If you tried interacting with them, nothing would happen, except for a single one, which for some reason had player collision implemented into its code. If you ran against this one specific chair while on low FPS, the game would get really confused on what the object's XYZ coordinates should be, and would consequently fling both itself and the player in a random direction. A day after this bug was found, people tried breaking out of bounds in a way to potentially skip all backstage, though no real method for it was ever found, making the chair useless. But let's imagine a different scenario, where the player is actually leaving backstage and instead of having to walk all the way to the theater entrance from where they initially came from, they would instead use the chair to launch themselves to the exit, saving a few seconds. Now, I know this sounds completely absurd for a multitude of reasons. The skip would barely save any time, it was awfully inconsistent, and had to be pulled midway through the run. And yet, despite all of this, a massive portion of the community began grinding it out. Surprisingly enough, some speedrunners actually managed to consistently pull off the launch after a few days, but nobody has ever successfully performed it in an actual run. But wait, why am I talking about the most minor time save imaginable that's so difficult nobody has been able to execute in mid-run yet? Well, first of all, I thought it'd be funny to point out since it has become an icon among the speedrunning Discord, and to this day I think that a third of the server still has the word chair on their nickname. But I also chose to include it because of the fact that absurd skips like these are a great example of how far speedrunners are willing to go as to achieve the fastest possible time on the game. I personally think that the chair skip will eventually be implemented into runs once the game becomes less active and the records remain unbeaten for a long period of time. It's only then that someone will have to change up the route in order to get the number 1 spot, and that's where I think this strat will come in handy. Though, I wouldn't be surprised if it took years before the leaderboards got to that state, seeing as how active the game is, plus the massive amount of skips that have been found within a month. I mean, we've found ways to abuse camera placements, skip whole segments of the game, get on top of the map, avoid enemy encounters, and so much more. What else can you possibly ask for? I feel like the only thing that's missing now is a way to skip getting an essential item like the cuff. But surely that's not possible since you needed to open the turnstile that allows you into the park, making any sort of progress pretty much impossible, right? Right? The day was June 1st, and some runners began focusing on trying to find potential time saves in the first area of the game, the park entrance. Among these runners was Mushy Meow, the owner of the speedrunning Discord. Mushy used the debug menu to fly up to a ledge that would normally be impossible to reach, and then jumped on top of a security camera. Just to give some quick context, these cameras are scattered throughout the map and follow the player wherever they go. If you were to get on top of them and move around, they'd start rotating at a very rapid pace as to match the place you are currently at, and just like chairs, they could launch you as a consequence. At the time, Mushy got a very slight bounce after spinning his camera for a good bit, which landed them on top of the prize corner building. Afterwards, they did a small set of jumps and managed to fall into the area that connects the park entrance to the tunnel, completely skipping the cuff section. Upon this discovery, the community lost its mind. To think that you could skip yet another huge portion of the game and shave off an additional 30 seconds was unbelievable, and unlike the chair skip, this one could actually be performed consistently without having much RNG in the way. This is mostly thanks to Hogs for finding a consistent camera bounce setup, which made the bug slightly easier to perform. Unfortunately though, there was no way to get up the ledge where Mushy had performed the bug, so everyone was left on a cliffhanger not knowing if this could become an actual strategy or not. But players weren't going to give up so easily, and just 2 hours later, a well-known runner by the name of Limitless would find a way to reach it. Limitless was and still is a very popular user among the Indigo Park speedrunning community, hunting for glitches, testing routes, and even performing the first ever blindfolded run of the game, which has since been optimized and lowered to an impressive 26:29. When he first found out about a potential way to skip the cuff, he tried absolutely everything to make it work, and all of his efforts paid off in the end. 2 hours into researching, him and Prolly noticed something strange right before you entered the park. Once the player fixed the generator in the main entrance and randomly opened the gate, they could quickly enter the park and position themselves in a way where the gate doors would eventually force you against the wall, elevating you upwards for a short amount of time. And it just so happened that the wall in question was directly under the ledge where the security camera was located. With that in mind, Limitless began doing some attempts with speed hacks in a way to slow the game down and allow for more precision, and after testing FPS, camera angles, and all sorts of different input combinations, this happened.
Oh, I did it!
This might have single-handedly been the biggest revelation in Indigo Park speedrunning to date. To think that in just under 2 hours an extremely complex strategy had been fully developed, allowing a huge portion of the run to be cut off, was just stunning. Mushy, Limitless, and Prolly had managed to connect the loose ends, and the cuff skip was officially deemed possible. From what we could tell by the video he had sent, by flinging your camera back and forth whilst going up, you'd receive more momentum, and consequently, a higher launch that would just barely make it to the ledge. What's even crazier is that not even half a day later, Limitless pulled both the gate launch and the camera bounce in a single attempt on normal speed, making him the first person to ever pull off the full skip without using any external tools, a massive accomplishment both for him and the speedrunning community as a whole. Although, it also brought in quite a bit of controversy. You see, up until mid-June, all Indigo Park speedruns had to be done on 60 FPS as to make skips fair for everyone. The higher FPS you played on, well, outside of the train ride of course, the smoother your execution would be, and this was heavily noticeable on the cuff skip, as it was much easier to perform on a higher frame rate. Limitless himself dedicated dozens of hours into trying to replicate the time save on 60 FPS, but to no avail. All of this caused a huge debate among the community, with some runners defending the allowance of higher FPS outside of the train ride as to make strats like these possible. However, other players stood for the exact opposite, saying it would make all categories reliant on who had the best hardware. Both of these arguments were extremely solid, and in the end, both 50% and 100% were eventually split into 2 FPS subcategories: 60, where the run would always have the same frame rate throughout, and TCO, which stands for train cap only, meaning that you could actively switch up FPS as long as you kept them capped during the ride. While the cuff skip was a massive advancement in terms of skip hunting for the speedrunning community, it sadly brought in quite a lot of controversy due to its complexity. Despite all of this though, I still think it's one of, if not the greatest time save in Indigo Park, and that's why I chose not to talk about it until now. Something about the way everything ended up coming together in the end just seemed absolutely unreal. I'm really impressed by everyone who took part into assembling this massive strat, mainly Mushy and Limitless for developing the two key parts of the skip, Hawks for coming up with a consistent camera launch, as well as Prolly and Low for theorizing and helping out with some issues. I'm glad that all of this combined effort went into producing such a cool time save, and with that in mind, the quest to break Indigo Park officially comes to an end. Indigo Park is one of the biggest names in mascothorror as of right now, and despite the first chapter being heavily playtested by many well-known content creators who are fond with the concept of breaking games, speedrunners still managed to break through and find countless amounts of bugs that could save time, going from just holding down the key to pick up items faster, all the way to finding complex strategies to get out of bounds, abusing physics, and messing with every setting available as to save off the most amount of time possible. Oh my god, I've actually reached the end. I literally don't know what to say right now. When I started back in June, I could have never guessed what I was getting into. I regret nothing though, but I must say, while I was in the process of making this video, a ton of strats were developed. I'm talking about ways to skip the theater, train, chase, and a hell ton of other stuff. I won't spoil much since I might end up making a sequel at some point, but just know that they were so broken, one of them actually ended up being called Sorry Skip, as an apology for me having to possibly rework the entire script because of it. Thanks guys. Anyways, this project took months of research and editing, so I wanted to thank everyone who has supported me in the Indigo Park Discord server. Mainly Starlord, Loaf, and 1K, since they have provided me with most of the background content used in the video, so be sure to give them some love as this project couldn't have been completed without their help. I'll also link the Discord in the description, as it is a very chill community willing to help out anyone who plans on running the game. And finally, I wanted to thank you for once again making it to the very end of this video. I'm gonna be honest, I don't expect this one to do well at all, but just knowing that someone actually watched this whole thing really keeps me motivated to make more stuff. Then again, sorry that this took like 5 months to upload. Hopefully it was worth the wait. But yeah, that was the quest to break Indigo Park. So it's finally time to roll the outro. Thanks for watching, and until next time, see ya!
Okay, I'll let you go. See you next time, buddy. Please.